Have you heard of the Ozaki 8? It is the legend of the 8 ultimate extreme ordeals. It comes from the film worshipped by extreme sports lovers as a masterpiece. This is a film that, after watching, will make your spirit surge and tremble endlessly. Utah and his brother were notorious extreme sports athletes on short-form video platforms. This time, they challenged each other to cross trailless hills and mountains. His friend wanted to give up, but Utah, who was always brave, encouraged his good brother. "Just try it once, just follow me." The two brothers then began a frenzied cross-country adventure. With masterful driving skills, they safely crossed the rolling hills and mountains. When they reached the edge of a cliff, Utah led the way, jumping over the cliff and landing safely on the top of a towering rock pillar opposite. But as the bike flew over, his brother couldn't brake in time. Both man and bike fell straight into the abyss. Utah watched helplessly as his brother disappeared right before his eyes. 7 years later, tormented by remorse and guilt, Utah completely abandoned his old life and entered the police academy. From a free-spirited, undisciplined wanderer who loved freedom, he became an FBI agent who strictly adhered to all disciplines and rules. His boss questioned Utah about his crazy past, but Utah replied that he was seeking the constraints of discipline. However, the boss didn't believe him, thinking Utah was running from the truth about his brother's death and challenging his level of desire to become a federal agent. Although Utah reiterated that the Bureau had checked his file, the boss still expressed skepticism and demanded that Utah prove himself worthy of the role of a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. Around this same time, several major, inexplicable crimes appeared. The first case was at a 100-story jewelry company in Mumbai. 3 robbers on motorcycles suddenly burst out of the elevator room. They wore masks and stole 10 million carats of diamonds. Then, to escape the pursuit of security, they smashed through the glass wall and parachuted down from the building over 400 m high. Afterwards, they distributed all the diamonds to the poor. The current information is that these individuals are still at large. What kind of people were they dealing with, after all? The second case, on a poor street in a remote Mexican countryside, cash suddenly rained down from the sky. The poor working people joyfully ran out to catch the bills falling from the sky. It turned out that on a money transport plane flying in the air, 2 men in black had secretly opened the plane's cargo bay, throwing out 2 large crates of cash. Then, both jumped out of the plane from a height of 10,000 meters, cutting the ties on the bundles of money, causing tens of millions of US dollars to flutter in the air. The two then flew straight towards the Swallow's Cave in the rainforest. Only after flying deep into the cave did they deploy their parachutes. Utah felt that the methods of these criminals were very familiar. After searching through a large amount of documents, Utah hurried to his black boss. He suspected that these cases were in fact all connected. These criminals were probably trying to complete the Ozaki 8. The Ozaki 8 are 8 super difficult extreme sports challenges created by the master of extreme ordeals, Ozaki, to pay homage to nature. It is said that by completing all the challenges, one will achieve nirvana, a complete renewal of body and mind. But to this day, no one has been able to complete all the challenges. And Ozaki himself died during the 3rd ordeal. Utah discovered that in the earliest case, an arson in a timber forest, several robbers, after setting the fire, used kayaks to dangerously navigate the rapids of the Congo River. This was actually the first of the Ozaki 8 ordeals, emerging force. Several of these people then skydived from the summit of Mount Everest. This is the 2nd ordeal, Birth of Sky. They descended at speed into the Swallow's Cave, then deployed their parachutes. This ordeal is called Awakening of Earth. These robbers had completed the first 3 ordeals. Now their target must be the 4th ordeal, Life of Water. Based on data from the Meteorological Bureau, Utah discovered that a once-in-a-decade tsunami-like wave was about to appear on the west coast of France. He asserted that the 3 robbers would definitely go there to complete the 4th ordeal. And so, Utah was dispatched to France to track the robbers. At the port of Paris, Utah met Agent Pappas, the veteran agent providing him support. Pappas drove a speedboat, taking him to the area where the giant waves were about to appear. Many surfing enthusiasts had already gathered here. Utah saw a girl with a stunning figure successfully ride out of the swirl of a giant wave. Utah was also eager to try, but he had never faced waves this big. At that moment, someone was already preparing for the challenge. Utah broke the rules of surfing by stealing the wave. According to the usual rules, Utah should have withdrawn from the challenge, but he charged in anyway. The two appeared inside the giant wave at the same time. The person in front had almost escaped the wave's vortex, but Utah was a step behind and was slammed by the wave into the sea, knocking him unconscious. As he sank unconsciously to the seabed, Someone swam over and rescued him from the water. When Utah woke up, he found himself on a yacht. And the person who saved him was none other than the man whose wave he had stolen. This person's name was Bodhi. He should have succeeded in the challenge this time, but he missed the opportunity because he saved Utah. Bodhi was very friendly, but a few of his friends were extremely wary of this stranger. On the yacht, Utah met the excellent female surfer he had seen earlier. It turned out she was also one of Bodhi's teammates. Her name was Samsara. Samsara gently led Utah to jump into the sea. They spent a romantic night in the ocean's embrace. The next day, Utah woke up to see Bodhi sitting in front of him. Bodhi had actually known of Utah's reputation for a long time. He wasn't sure why a racer like Utah would show up here. But seeing Utah surf, he noticed a lack of respect for nature and advised him to leave soon. Pappas felt that Utah had gained nothing and wanted to bring him back to America. But the young and passionate Utah did not want to give up. He was adamant that Bodhi and his friends were the criminals. He begged Pappas for more time, certain that he would find evidence. Following unofficial information, Utah found Bodhi and his group again at an underground boxing ring in Paris. Bodhi's friends were both surprised and angry to see Utah appear once more. They questioned how Utah had found them. But Bodhi, as the leader, lied that he himself had shown Utah the way. He clearly had a fondness for the young man before him. Utah expressed his desire to join their team. Bodhi then demanded Utah fight a match with him. The two men, bare-chested, stood opposite each other, throwing fiery punches, blood splattering. But Bodhi's boxing skills were clearly stronger, and he knocked Utah down. Having lost his chance to join the group, Utah felt extremely disappointed. Unexpectedly, Bodhi came back to his side and offered him an invitation to the Ozaki ordeal, Life of Wind. Utah followed Bodhi's group to the Alps. Several people carried their gear up to the mountain peak. One of them asked Utah to take out the rock. Utah asked blankly what rock. It turned out they had played a prank, placing a heavy rock in Utah's backpack. But this rock was useful. Bodhi told his teammate to prepare a stopwatch and then threw the rock off the cliff. 6 seconds later, they heard the sound of the rock hitting the ground. They roughly estimated the cliff to be about 180 m high. In the evening, some used fire-making techniques to light a campfire. Bodhi told Utah that they challenged the Ozaki 8 not for some ridiculous so-called nirvana. The real purpose is the desire for more people to see the beauty of the earth, to give back to this planet, not to take from it. That is the path they are following. To achieve it, one must completely abandon the ego and let the heart lead the way. Bodhi concluded that if Utah walked the same path as them, the dawn would be the answer. The next morning, the four of them put on wingsuits, ready to start the fifth ordeal, Life of Wind. The four formed a formation, soaring through the valley. A wingsuit is different from a parachute. It requires the flyer to feel the direction of the wind, to become one with the wind and move with it. Otherwise, they will fall into an inescapable abyss. The four flew out of the mountainous area, finally deploying their parachutes one by one. Just like that, they all landed safely on the meadow, successfully challenging the Life of Wind. The four hugged each other tightly. In this moment, they had finally accepted Utah, who had gone through life and death with them. Immediately after, they began the sixth ordeal, Life of Ice. Bodhi found a trailless snow mountain in Italy. They had to snowboard from the summit to the base. But when everyone saw where they were about to ride, they began to tremble. This was truly a meat grinder of snow. But this time, the one to lead the jump was Utah, the newcomer. He seemed to have recovered his adventurous, bold, and free-spirited instincts of the past. A few people shook their heads and then followed him down the cliff. The group weaved quickly between the hard rock masses. Just a slight deviation, and they would be smashed to pieces. But God does not always favor the same group of people. This time, Gromit, one of the four, panicked after accidentally slipping at a turn. A violent tumble sent him falling straight into the abyss. The remaining three reached the finish line only to realize one person was missing. Utah was frantic. He wanted to go back and find Gromit because he was the one who led the way. As Utah blamed himself for choosing the route that got Gromit killed and wanted to go back to find him, Bodhi cut him off, asserting that Gromit chose that path for himself. And his death was not Utah's fault. The group found Gromit's body and performed a traditional cremation ceremony for him. Utah was filled with self-blame, drinking alone to drown his sorrows. Samsara came to his side and told him her story. It turned out Samsara was the adopted daughter of the extreme sports master Ozaki, and Bodhi was Ozaki's disciple. And Ozaki did not die during the third ordeal, Awakening of Earth, as rumored. He had actually completed that challenge. Ozaki was killed by a speeding whaling ship in the Atlantic Ocean as he tried to stop their cruel actions. The young man on the boat with Ozaki at that time survived. That person was Bodhi. Perhaps that's why Bodhi was so obsessed with completing the Ozaki 8. He had inherited the path of his master, Ozaki, but it had become his obsession. As they shared their feelings, the hearts of the two young people grew closer. Finally, they kissed passionately. The next day, Bodhi took Utah to a mine that had been exploited for 20 years straight. This time they weren't performing an ordeal, but giving back to the earth. Bodhi's teammate opened a suitcase full of C4 explosives. It turned out that what Bodhi called giving back was to bury this mine, returning it to the earth. Utah closed his eyes in anguish. What he didn't want to believe had happened. Bodhi and his friends were indeed the previous robbers. It was time for him to make a choice. Bodhi's group split into two. Bodhi led Utah to harass the security vehicle convoy, while the other two rode motorcycles to the mountaintop to plant the bombs. Bodhi drove the jeep, repeatedly ramming into the moving trucks. He even knocked a security vehicle off a cliff. Seeing everything was ready, Bodhi prepared to activate the remote detonator. Utah could finally bear it no longer. Utah finally revealed his identity, but Bodhi still pressed the button. The mountaintop exploded, countless rocks rolling and tumbling down. Bodhi got on his motorcycle and rode down the slope. Utah quickly got another motorcycle and gave chase. The two dodged the falling boulders and raced into the dense forest. During the chase, Bodhi knocked Utah off his bike. They both fell into a small river. When Bodhi stood up, Utah had a gun pointed at him. In the tense standoff, Bodhi revealed that the group had known Utah was a cop from the very beginning. When Utah questioned why they still let him join, Bodhi answered curtly, "Because I thought I could save you." Utah was taken back to FBI headquarters. Boss was very displeased with Utah because his actions had crossed the line. Not only did he fail to inform his superiors of the whereabouts of Bodhi and his gang to prevent this fourth major crime, but he also became intimate with Samsara, Bodhi's adopted sister. Utah was suspended. The boss also told him that the authorities had frozen the finances of Bodhi's sponsor, so they would not be able to continue committing crimes. But Utah, who understood Bodhi well, felt the opposite. He knew Bodhi would definitely complete all the ordeals. Freezing their finances would only force Bodhi to commit crimes illegally to raise money. As expected, Utah was right. The police surveillance system showed several people in black on motorcycles speeding through the city streets. They had appeared despite the manhunt. Utah guessed they were preparing to rob a bank. But it was the weekend, and only one bank on the main road at the top of the mountain was open. Utah determined that Bodhi and his gang would definitely go to rob this bank. Boss let Utah get into Pappas' car. Old man Pappas gave him a gun, tough on the outside but soft on the inside, saying he didn't want Utah to die right in front of him. Don't be fooled by this old man's usual sloppiness. When it matters, he instantly becomes exceptionally sharp. He didn't follow the main convoy, but chose a shortcut straight up the mountain. When they reached the summit, several police cars had surrounded the bank's entrance. Three masked men in black, carrying submachine guns, smashed through the glass door and engaged in a fierce shootout with the police. Utah wanted to intervene, but no one listened to him anymore. One of them took off his mask. It was Roach, Bodhi's teammate. He was hit by multiple bullets and died on the spot. The other two men in black threw a flashbang grenade and escaped on motorcycles. Utah chased after one of the figures in black. Thinking it was Bodhi, he fired his gun, hitting the motorcycle's tire. The robber abandoned the bike, ran for his life, and jumped onto a tourist cable car. Seeing he couldn't catch up, Utah climbed onto a roof, launched himself, and jumped onto the roof of the cable car. Utah kicked through the window, stormed into the cabin, and saw the person in black about to shoot him. Utah had to shoot first in self-defense. Utah walked over, removed the mask, and discovered it wasn't Bodhi, but Samsara. Utah was both pained and furious. He stepped out of the cable car and saw Bodhi standing on the opposite platform. The two looked at each other across the tracks. The two brothers who once embraced were now enemies on different sides. Utah angrily wanted to rush across the tracks to beat Bodhi to within an inch of his life. If it weren't for him, Samsara wouldn't have died. But an approaching train stopped him in his tracks. When the train passed, Bodhi had vanished without a trace. Bodhi disappeared, and no one knew his next move. Utah took a map and began to analyze. He listed the locations where Bodhi had performed the ordeals on the map and scribbled continuously on a blackboard. Finally, he figured out the destination of Bodhi's next ordeal. The previous 6 ordeals were all downward. The 7th ordeal, Master of 6 Lives, would have to defy gravity and go upward. Bodhi would choose the form of free solo rock climbing, without ropes or any safety measures. Utah was certain Bodhi would choose his birthplace, Angel Falls in Venezuela. However, Venezuela is a country beyond American jurisdiction. So, Pappas, with his vast experience, secretly got Utah in. Angel Falls is the world's tallest waterfall with a height of 979 m. Bodhi and his last teammate, Gromit, stood at the base of the falls. The sheer, towering cliff was truly terrifying. Gromit couldn't see a path and felt a bit scared. The stubborn Bodhi was mesmerized by this cliff. He even found it beautiful. Gromit didn't want to climb, so Bodhi said nothing. He took off his jacket and began to climb alone. At this time, DiTi had arrived. To escape DiTi's pursuit, Gromit had no choice but to follow. DiTi looked at the two people on the cliff, took a deep breath, changed his clothes, and began to climb. On the 979 m sheer cliff, 3 men climbed without any safety measures. On the nearly 90-degree vertical cliff face, there were only tiny holds for their fingertips or toes. It was a process of them risking their lives against death. Sometimes they even had to change their position and jump with all their might to reach the next foothold. Gromit also gathered his strength and jumped, but his other hand couldn't find a grip, leaving both his legs dangling. Gromit held his entire body with one hand, trying repeatedly to get both hands on the cliff, but failed. They were almost at the summit. Bodhi's last teammate was also gone. He looked down at DiTi once, then turned his head and continued to climb. When DiTi reached the top of the cliff, he was completely exhausted. He saw Bodhi standing at the edge of the abyss. The 7th ordeal, master of 6 lives. They had both succeeded, but DiTi still had to bring him to justice. Bodhi told him not yet, because he was still missing the 8th ordeal, the act of ultimate trust, which was not complete. With that said, Bodhi suddenly leaned back and fell straight down the waterfall. DiTi followed closely, jumping down as well. DiTi surfaced, his face covered in injuries. By extraordinary luck, he had fallen from such a terrifying height and not died. But he found no trace of Bodhi. Papa said his body was probably washed downstream by the river, but DiTi knew in his heart that Bodhi was definitely still alive. 17 months later, the Pacific Ocean once again saw historically massive waves. DiTi, now an experienced FBI agent, flew by helicopter to this raging sea. DiTi landed on a small boat on the ocean's surface, and the person rowing was Bodhi. It seemed that from that last jump, Bodhi indeed did not die. So why had he come to the ocean again? Because the previous Life of Water challenge, Bodhi had not completed it because he saved DiTi. So this was Bodhi's final ordeal. As long as he completed this challenge, Bodhi would have fully completed the 8 Ozaki ordeals. But the wave this time was even bigger than the last. To charge into it meant never returning. The two brothers said their final goodbyes. DiTi also gave up on arresting him. He returned to the helicopter. He had allowed Bodhi to see his own path to the end. Bodhi locked the rudder of the small boat. With a tremendous roar, he charged straight into the giant wave. In the end, Bodhi disappeared into the vast ocean. Bodhi's life may have ended, but the legend of the Ozaki 8 spread even wider, becoming a legend in the hearts of every extreme sports lover who cherishes the earth. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this film? Please comment down below.